right, YouTube, SEC, and Auburn fans, want to talk real briefly tonight, as we always do, about the scope of college football. We're talking about the coronavirus pandemic that is still pretty much relevant, even though the doors of the country are starting to open. Restaurants are starting to be a little bit more accessible, going from just strictly to-go business all the way to dine-in business. And social places are starting to open up again. So it's starting to look a little promising as it relates to the possibility of a college football season happening. The only drawback is you got players coming back to camps with the coronavirus. And those guys have to be held in quarantine for at least 2 weeks, showing no symptoms anymore before they are allowed to get back into competition. I think about this kind of sort of like the targeting penalty in college football. I mean, if you come in, you show up to a game, which is highly likely, especially if you get down into the late September, early October, mid-November, where immune systems really start to become compromised because of the changing of the weather, and that seems to be the times where people catch the colds and the flus and pneumonias and all those types of things. You can have one of your star players out of the game showing symptoms of either coronavirus or it might be the flu. Check the temp, you're 103, you got to sit out. So that kind of stuff changes the scope of what will be easily. That's why I say strap your seatbelts on, because it's going to easily be the most challenging season of that we've ever seen with college football, assuming that the season even takes place. I applaud the young men and the young women of college athleticism that have decided to still compete in the sport that they love and that they work so hard for. It's really admirable that these kids are still even willing to play. We're talking about whether there will be a football season or not, but it's even admirable for these kids to even consider playing the sport, which just shows the love and devotion and the dedication to the sport in general. You have players who are coming back with the coronavirus who, showing symptoms, things like that, and have to quarantine. All of these things that they have to do to show that patience, to show that, endurance, that, hey, we still want to play. We still want to compete. This is what we do. Okay? So that's going to be one of the challenges in this college football season taking place. And this time last year, especially when I was doing this Vernon Speak Sports Auburn football coverage, I just never would have thought that this would be something that would be factored in into the college football season. Big shout out to all the SEC schools. Big shout out to Power 5. Big shout out to all of the student athletes out there who are, just in limbo as to whether this thing will take place or not. And then you think about the workouts. Will these kids be in a good enough physical condition to really, really compete at the level that they would have if spring football would have taken place? If they would have had the access to, kind of look at the playbooks and really see what they were getting into. My heart definitely goes out to all the early enrollees who, early enroll with the prospect of, having that competitive edge to get a head start of the rest of the guys in their class. That definitely did not take place, especially one of the ones that I was really looking for from Auburn is Tank Bigsby. That's the guy that I was really looking to see if he could take advantage of that time, just like Owen Papo and Bo Nix did back in 2019. So it's just going to be very interesting to see how this thing plays out. Also, with recruiting in 2021, Auburn is definitely in a position where they really want to make sure they solidify this particular recruiting class. And when you really start to look at it, Auburn is in a position to where they definitely need to continue to recruit at a somewhat high level for Auburn to remain relevant and to compete They got to be at least 7 or more ranking wise. And even with a 7 ranked recruiting class, between 5 and 10, 5 is very unlikely for the Tigers this year. But we'll say between about 7 or 8, maybe 9 at the most. That particular recruiting class ranking need to be very solid in the middle. I'm talking about 92s, 93s, 94s. Now, what's going to really bring this particular class down as to why I don't think Auburn will have a top 5 recruiting class is because the offensive linemen, unless the offensive linemen recruited in this class can gain some type of higher ranking during their the last portion of their high school tenure, the offensive linemen are going to bring this particular class down. I just don't think that with all of the guys involved, Auburn is definitely going to have, in order for Auburn to have like a top 5 or top 4, which is very unlikely, recruiting class, especially at the rate that Ohio State and, Alabama, Georgia, the rate that those guys are recruiting, I just don't think Auburn can possibly even think about having a top 5 recruiting class. It's just, and especially with Clemson being involved, it's just not going to happen. Like I said before, what's going to bring this recruiting class down is the fact that Auburn has so many lower rated offensive linemen. That doesn't mean the recruiting class is bad. That's one of the things that I want you guys to really pay attention to, is the fact that just because a recruiting class is, say, number 10, number 8, now once you get up to 4, 3, 2, and 1, those are just solid. 5 is pretty much solid. But when you get down to 6 and 7, on the way down to 10, that's when things get real tricky, to where you have to really dissect the quality of the recruiting class. And if you find a recruiting class that's, say, number 6, but their top 2 guys are 5 stars, the middle starts around 91 and tapers off, I don't think that's not a roster building recruiting class. What you want to look for is maybe a 5-star recruit, but that thing is followed up by 96s, 97s, 95s, 93s, 92s. And I'm talking about all the way through the middle of that class, and then starting to taper off. And then when it does taper off, it doesn't taper off no lower than about 86. Okay? And usually when it tapers off around 86, you don't need those 86s to be your skill players. Those need to be your offensive linemen, your tight ends, guys like those that you don't need. I mean, you need a skill set, but when you talk about difference makers, those skill players, those defensive end, those defensive linemen, linebackers, you want them to be around that 90, between that 91 and that 96 range, because those are 5-star-ish players, but they just didn't reach that threshold competition-wise as to where they can get that 5th star. Now, usually the 5th star, I mean, it's just usually generational talent, once-in-a-generation type talent, or highly elite talent, and usually those guys start their first year. Think about Bo Nix. Think about Owen Papo. Think about Kayvon Thibodeau out of Oregon. All these guys started their first year and were very impactful their first year. Now, a lot of times with your 97s, they might be able to start their first year, but usually they get that limited playing time, and usually they break out the second year, right? So they're still not bad recruits. It just takes them a little bit longer for their talent to transfer over to Power 5 football, right? So can Auburn retain the type of class that can be competitive long term? They're getting off to a good start with Lee Hunter out of Mobile, and a couple of guys out of Texas, and Armani Goodwin. If they can retain those guys, yeah, I think it's a pretty solid class. Demartrius Davis out of Houston. If they can retain those guys, I think they can be solid. But is Auburn going to have a top 5 recruiting class this year? I don't think so. But they have to be very educated in how they recruit, so that they can have at least enough overlapping in talent to where, let's just say they do have a successful season in 2020, assuming that the football season happens. Success brings those high-level recruits. You make it to a New Year's Six Bowl, you possibly make it to a college football playoff, then that's when the recruits start to really look at you as a viable candidate as a school that they want to go to. You think about Auburn in basketball. They make the Final Four, and now all of a sudden, Auburn can legitimately target some of the best high school basketball players in the country. That's something that Auburn could have taken advantage of back in 2013, winning that national championship, but losing it, you set yourself back from a recruiting standpoint. Auburn wins the 2010 national championship, then follows that up with a 2013 national championship. That puts Auburn on a similar playing field, maybe as Clemson. Maybe Clemson actually took the place that Auburn could have. And the crazy part about it is the margin of error is so thin. 1 minute, Auburn hangs on to that win, beats Florida State, beats a Heisman Trophy candidate, Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Jameis Winston. And you talk about the trajectory of Auburn is totally different now. But a squandered opportunity. Okay? So those are the things you want to look at when you talk about recruiting and when you talk about the winning impact of a team, from a football team in Power 5. So can Auburn be a top 5 recruiting class in 2021? Very doubtful. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast talking Auburn football. Go ahead and like the video, comment, and subscribe. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.